The woman sitting across from my husband at our anniversary dinner was wearing my dead grandmother's emerald ring. Not a ring that looked like it. Mine. The one with the chipped setting on the left prong. The one I'd kept in the velvet box inside my nightstand for 11 years. And my husband, Thatcher Caldwell, good-looking, God-fearing Rotary Club attending Thatcher. He was pouring her a glass of the same Sancerre he'd ordered on our first date, completely unaware that I was standing 14 feet away, behind the frosted glass partition at Chandler's Steakhouse on 8th Street in Boise, watching everything. She laughed at something he said. He reached across the table and touched the ring on her finger, my ring, and smiled the way he used to smile at me. Possessive. Proud. The hostess asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. I ordered a water. Then I sat at the bar and started taking photographs with the Nikon D750 hanging around my neck, because old habits die hard when you've spent your entire adult life behind a lens. But this story doesn't start in a steakhouse. It starts in a darkroom. An actual, physical darkroom, with red safe lights and chemical trays, and the sharp bite of developer solution at 68 degrees. Because that's where I learned everything that mattered. How to watch, how to wait, and how to make sure the picture comes out exactly right. My name is Ellery Tanaka Voss. In 2019, I was 34 years old, a forensic photographer working contract jobs for the Ada County Coroner's Office and 3 different insurance firms in the Treasure Valley. My specialty was documenting things people didn't want documented: car wrecks, fire damage, slip and fall scenes, and the occasional crime scene when the county was short-staffed. I was the person they called when the details mattered, when a photograph might be the difference between a $12,000 payout and a $1.2 million settlement. Before that, I'd been a wedding photographer for 6 years. Ironic, right? I spent my 20s making other people's marriages look beautiful, and then I spent my 30s proving that beautiful things can be faked. The transition felt natural. Growing up, my family wasn't the kind you'd put on a Christmas card. My mother, Yuki, came to Idaho from Sapporo in 1981 with a degree in chemistry and no English, and a stubbornness that could sand down granite. My father, Gerald Voss, was a potato farmer's son from Meridian, who met her at a church potluck and proposed 6 weeks later with a ring he'd fashioned from copper wire because he couldn't afford gold. They made it work for 22 years on the kind of love that doesn't photograph well. Quiet, exhausted, full of unspoken compromise. My mother's father, Ji-chan, lived with us from the time I was 9 until he passed when I was 26. He was a retired optics engineer who'd worked for Nikon in the 70s, which is how I got into photography. He gave me my first camera, a battered FM2 with a stuck aperture ring, and taught me to develop film in the laundry room. But the thing I remember most about Ji-chan wasn't the cameras. It was something he said to me when I was 14, after a boy at school had stolen my science project and claimed it as his own, and no one believed me. He sat me down at the kitchen table with a bowl of miso soup and said, "Ellery, the patient eye makes the permanent record." I didn't fully understand it then. I thought he meant something about photography. He did, but he also meant something about life, about how watching carefully, waiting long enough, and capturing the right moment at the right time is worth more than any argument or any fight. That quote lived in my bones. It became the way I moved through the world, and eventually, it became the way I dismantled my husband's entire life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's something else you should know about me. Since I was about 20, I've had this compulsive habit of backing up everything. Every photograph I've ever taken is stored in 3 places: an external hard drive, a cloud server, and a set of archival DVDs I keep in a fireproof safe at my mother's house in Meridian. Every contract I've signed, every email, every text message. My phone automatically backs up to 2 different cloud services every night at 2 a.m. Thatcher used to make fun of me for it. He'd say, "Who are you, the FBI?" And I'd laugh because it seemed harmless and maybe a little neurotic. It wasn't neurotic, it was the foundation of everything. One more thing. In the summer of 2016, 3 years before any of this happened, I helped my mother refinance the house in Meridian. While I was organizing her paperwork, I noticed that the original deed to the property my parents bought together in 1988 listed my mother as sole owner. My father had insisted on it, some old-fashioned protective instinct. My mother mentioned that she'd done the same thing when she helped Thatcher and me buy our first house in 2014. "I made sure your name is protected, Ellery," she said, "just like your father did for me." I filed that away. I didn't think about it again for 3 years. Remember it, though, it matters. The day I met Thatcher Caldwell, I was photographing a wedding at the Boise Depot, that beautiful Spanish-style building up on the bench with the views of downtown. It was September 2012, one of those September evenings in Boise when the sky turns copper and the air smells like sage and cooling asphalt. He was a groomsman, tall, dirty blonde, jaw like a geometry problem. He caught my eye during the ceremony and winked, which should have annoyed me but didn't, because he had this way of making impolite things feel like a secret between just the two of you. At the reception, he brought me a plate of bruschetta and a glass of champagne without being asked. "You've been working for 4 hours straight," he said. "When's the last time someone took care of you?" And God help me, that line worked, because nobody had asked me that, not once. My whole life had been watching, documenting, making everyone else's moments permanent while mine evaporated. Here was this man with broad shoulders and an easy laugh offering to hold the camera so I could eat. We talked for 40 minutes in the parking lot after the reception. He sold commercial HVAC systems for a company called Climate Pro, which is maybe the least romantic job description possible. But he made it sound interesting. He had opinions about ductwork. Actual opinions. I found it charming in a way I still can't fully explain. We married in June 2014. Small ceremony. My mother made onigiri for the reception because I'd always loved them more than cake. Thatcher's mother, Deirdre, flew in from Scottsdale and spent the entire weekend making comments about the food being ethnic and the venue being quaint, which is rich lady code for not expensive enough. I should have paid more attention to Deirdre. She was the first red flag, wrapped in Chanel No. 5 and unsolicited advice. But the early years were good, genuinely good. Saturday mornings at Goldie's Breakfast Bistro on Capitol Boulevard, splitting the Dutch baby pancake and fighting over the last strip of bacon. Camping at Redfish Lake in August, his sunburned nose, my overexposed photos of the sawtooths. He built me a dark room in the basement, actual light-sealed door, proper ventilation, the works. He spent $4,200 in 2 weekends on it, and when he showed me, he looked so proud I thought my chest might crack open. We tried for kids. It didn't happen. After 18 months and 2 rounds of IUI at $1,800 each, we decided to take a break from trying. Thatcher said he was fine with it. "We're enough," he said, and kissed my forehead. And I believed him because I needed to. The first change was small. Autumn 2017. His phone, which had always been face up on the kitchen counter, started living face down. I noticed it on a Tuesday in October while I was making yakisoba for dinner. The screen buzzed against the granite, and he crossed the kitchen in 2 steps to grab it before I could glance over. He didn't say anything, just took it and walked into the other room. By December, he'd changed the passcode. I know because I tried our anniversary, 0621, and got the wrong password screen. When I mentioned it casually, he said, "Work made us update our security protocols. It's a compliance thing. Climate Pro sells air conditioners. There is no compliance thing." In February 2018, he started going to the gym at 5:30 a.m. Thatcher hadn't voluntarily exercised since college. Within 2 months, he'd dropped 15 pounds, bought new underwear, boxer briefs, which he'd never worn, and started using a cologne I didn't recognize, Acqua di Gio. I know because I found the bottle in his gym bag while looking for my missing car charger. Then came the generosity. A $340 pair of boots from Nordstrom for my birthday. A weekend trip to McCall just because. An unprompted "I love you" at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. Guilt has a very specific spending pattern, and I'd been photographing insurance fraud long enough to recognize when the numbers don't match the narrative. And that was just the beginning. March 2018, a Saturday. Thatcher said he was going to a Climate Pro training seminar in Twin Falls. Gone all day, back by 9. Normal enough. But I'd been contracted to photograph water damage at a commercial property in Twin Falls that same week. And while I was driving through town, I passed the Hampton Inn on Blue Lakes Boulevard and saw his truck, the black F-150 with the Climate Pro magnet on the tailgate, parked not at the convention center where the seminar supposedly was, but in the hotel lot, at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I didn't stop. I didn't confront him. At 2, I drove past, noted the time, and took a photograph through the windshield. Professional habit. The patient eye makes the permanent record. That night, he came home smelling like lavender hotel soap and told me the seminar had been brutal and he was wiped. He ate the udon I'd made him, kissed my cheek, and fell asleep on the couch. I sat in the darkroom until 1 a.m. developing prints from a fender bender on Fairview Avenue and tried to convince myself there was an explanation. There was, just not the one I wanted. The first time he was openly cruel was at a barbecue at his coworker Gage Pellerin's house in Eagle, July 2018. There were maybe 15 people there. Climate Pro guys and their wives, a few neighbors. We were standing around the cooler, and someone asked about my work. I started explaining forensic photography, how we document trajectory patterns in car accidents, how you can reconstruct speed from glass dispersion. And I could tell people were interested. Thatcher cut me off. "Ellery takes pictures of dead people's stuff for a living," he said. Big smile. Hand on my shoulder like he was being affectionate. "It's basically a hobby that pays." Everyone laughed, and I stood there holding a paper plate of potato salad, and something in my chest went very still. On the drive home, I told him that was embarrassing. He said, "You're being sensitive. It was a joke. Nobody cares about shutter speeds at a barbecue, L." L. He'd started shortening my name, and it felt less like intimacy and more like reduction, like I was being edited down. By fall 2018, the control had a structure. He wanted to know where I was at all times, not aggressively. He framed it as concern. "Just text me when you get to the site, okay? I worry." But if I didn't text within 10 minutes of arriving somewhere, he'd call. If I went to the grocery store and came back with something that wasn't on the list, he'd ask why I'd been gone so long. 45 minutes for 12 items, L? What were you doing? Then came the money. In November 2018, he suggested we consolidate our accounts. "It's just simpler," he said. "We're a team." He wanted my freelance income deposited into a joint account he'd manage because he was better with money. This from a man who'd financed a $62,000 truck at 6.9% interest. But I was tired, and fighting felt like admitting something was wrong, so I agreed. Almost. My mother stopped me. She called on a Sunday morning. She always called on Sundays. And I mentioned it casually, and she went quiet for 5 seconds. Then she said, "Ellery, keep your own account. Put half in joint. Keep half separate. Tell him whatever you need to tell him." So I did. I told Thatcher I'd set up the direct deposit. And I did. For half. The other half went into a savings account at a different credit union, the one on Orchard Street that my mother had used since 1987. Thatcher never checked. He assumed compliance because that's what people like him do. December 2018. The woman appeared. Not to me, to the world. Her name was Waverly Ashcroft, and she was a pharmaceutical sales rep who'd started covering the Treasure Valley territory for Estella's in September. Blonde, 27. Instagram presence that was 60% wine glasses and 40% hiking boots. I found her because Thatcher's phone buzzed during dinner. We were eating takeout pad thai from Mai Tai on Main Street, and the notification preview showed a text from Waverly A that read, "Tonight was perfect. I can still taste you." He grabbed the phone so fast he knocked over his Singa beer. Amber liquid pooling across the table, soaking into the paper napkins. He mopped it up and said, "Work contact. Annoying." Waverly is a work contact? I said. New rep for one of our vendors. She's pushy. I can still taste you. Pushy. I said nothing else. I finished my pad thai. I went to the dark room and I sat in the dark, not developing anything, just sitting. And I thought about Ji-chan and his patient eye, and I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a movie decision, just a quiet, internal recalibration, like adjusting a lens until the blur becomes sharp. I was going to watch, I was going to document. And when I had everything I needed, I was going to make the most permanent record of my life. The cruelty accelerated after Christmas. January 2019. He started criticizing my appearance. You'd look better if you lost 10 pounds, said while I was eating breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast at our kitchen counter, 7:15 a.m. He said it like he was offering helpful advice, like he was doing me a favor. He had a way of delivering insults in the exact vocal register of kindness. You're lucky I'm honest with you, he'd say. Other guys would just let you go. Let me go. Like I was a fish he'd decided to throw back. February 2019 brought the spatial violations. I came home from a 3-day contract job in Nampa, documenting fire damage at a strip mall, and found that Thatcher had reorganized the darkroom. My chemical trays were stacked wrong. My print washer was disconnected. A box of archival paper, $180 worth, was sitting on the concrete floor next to a leaking pipe. When I confronted him, he shrugged. I needed space for the weight bench. You barely use that room anymore. That was a lie. I used it every week. He knew that. But the dark room was my space, the one place in that house that was entirely mine, and he'd invaded it the way you'd walk into someone's diary and start crossing out pages. A week later, I found a long blonde hair on our bathroom counter. Waverly was blonde. I photographed the hair next to a ruler for scale, noted the date, and stored the image in a folder on my cloud server labeled Insurance Audit Commercial 2019. Boring enough that nobody would ever open it. Then Deirdre got involved. Thatcher's mother flew up from Scottsdale in March 2019 for what she called a family visit, but what was actually a 4-day campaign of psychological warfare. She stayed in our guest room and spent every morning making comments about the house. This kitchen is so compact, isn't it? And every evening making comments about me. The worst was on the third night. We were having dinner at Barbacoa, that upscale place downtown, and Deirdre ordered a $58 steak and then turned to me and said, in front of Thatcher and 2 of his cousins, Ellery, dear, I've been meaning to ask, when are you going to get a real career? Taking pictures of car accidents isn't exactly something you put on a family Christmas letter. I looked at Thatcher. He was studying his menu. Thatcher, I said, are you going to say anything? He took a sip of his old-fashioned. She's got a point, Elle. You could do more. His cousin Brennick laughed into his napkin. Deirdre smiled like a woman who just won a game she'd been playing for years. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the toilet lid in a stall that smelled like eucalyptus hand soap and stared at the tile floor and thought, I am going to take you apart. All of you. Slowly. And you're going to hand me the tools to do it. But I didn't cry. Crying was for people who hadn't made a plan yet. April 2019, the cruelest moment. I'd been contracted to photograph a series of properties for an insurance company. Routine stuff, documenting pre-existing damage on rental units. One of the properties was a 2-bedroom condo on Ustic Road. When I pulled up at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, the property manager handed me the key and the lease agreement for reference. The tenant's name on the lease was Waverly R. Ashcroft. The co-signer was Thatcher M. Caldwell. My husband had co-signed a lease for his mistress. In a condo 12 minutes from our house. I stood in the parking lot holding the lease agreement, and the April sun was hitting the Boise foothills and turning them green the way they do every spring, and a meadowlark was singing somewhere in the scrub brush behind the building, and the world was so aggressively, insultingly beautiful that I wanted to scream. Instead, I photographed the lease, both sides. Then I went inside and did my job. documented the water stain on the bedroom ceiling, the cracked grout in the bathroom, the chip in the kitchen counter. And while I was there, I noticed things. His brand of deodorant in the medicine cabinet, Old Spice Fiji, a Climate Pro polo draped over a dining chair, and on the nightstand, in a velvet box that I recognized because it had lived in my nightstand for 11 years, my grandmother's emerald ring. He'd given her obeisance ring, the ring my grandmother had worn for 43 years, the ring my mother had given me the day after the funeral, pressing it into my palm and saying, "This is yours now. Keep it close." I picked up the box, opened it, the chipped prong on the left side, the inscription inside the band, YT 1965, Yuki Tanaka, my grandmother's maiden initials, and the year my grandfather gave it to her. I photographed it. 12 angles, close-ups of the inscription. Then I put it back exactly where I found it, and I finished the job. And I drove to the parking lot of the Albertsons on Milwaukee Street, and sat in my Subaru out back, and ate a granola bar from the glove compartment, and felt nothing. Nothing. Not rage, not grief. Just the flat, clean clarity of someone who has finally stopped hoping and started working. The patient eye makes the permanent record. Over the next 4 months, I built a case with the same precision I'd used to document a crime scene. Because that's what this was. What Thatcher didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd started collecting evidence the night of the pad thai, December 2018. 4 months before I found the condo. Everything that followed was just additional documentation. My cloud folder, the boring one labeled Insurance Audit Commercial 2019, contained 247 photographs by July. The hair on the counter, the hotel in Twin Falls, the lease agreement, the ring. His truck parked at her condo at 11 p.m. On nights, he said he was at Gage's house watching basketball. Screenshots of credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to. $187 at Chandler's, $94 at Bitter Creek Ale House, $220 at a boutique hotel in Sun Valley. Every image time-stamped, GPS tagged, and backed up in 3 locations. But photographs were only part of it. Remember my backup habit? The one Thatcher called FBI-level paranoid? Every text message, every email, every notification that appeared on our shared iPad, which he'd forgotten was synced to his iCloud, was automatically archived. I had 6 months of messages between Thatcher and Waverly. Love notes, plans, complaints about me. L is so boring, one said, dated February 14th, 2019, Valentine's Day. He'd given me a grocery store card that morning. She has no ambition. You're everything she's not. And then there were the financials. In May, while Thatcher was on a business trip to Portland, I confirmed via Find My iPhone that he was actually in McCall, at a cabin I found listed on Airbnb for $275 a night. I sat down with our joint bank statements and my laptop, and I did what I do professionally. I followed the evidence. In 14 months, Thatcher had spent $34,720 on Waverly Ashcroft. Dinners, hotels, gifts, her rent deposits, a $2,800 necklace from a jeweler on 8th Street, all from our joint account, all disguised as business expenses or ATM withdrawals in round numbers, $200 here, $500 there. He was sloppy because he thought I wasn't looking. But here's the part that changed everything. Remember what my mother told me in 2016 about the house deed? When I pulled the Ada County property records, which are public, by the way, anyone can access them at the assessor's website, I discovered something that made me sit very still for a very long time. Our house, the 3-bedroom on Hillway Drive that we'd bought in 2014 for $289,000, was listed under my name, mine alone. My mother, who'd helped with the down payment and handled the paperwork because Thatcher hated dealing with legal stuff, had quietly ensured that the title was in Ellery Tanaka Voss's name. Not Thatcher M. Caldwell, not jointly. He didn't own our house. He lived in it. There's a difference. I called my mother that night. "Did you do this on purpose?" I asked. 5 seconds of silence. Then, your grandfather always said to count the windows before you buy the curtains. I counted. She knew. Maybe not what, but she knew something. Mothers of daughters keep one eye open even when they're sleeping. In June, I hired an attorney. Not a flashy one. A quiet, methodical family lawyer named Prentice Ogawa, who worked out of a small office on Front Street and had a reputation for being the person you called when you needed documentation to speak louder than emotion. I brought her the cloud folder, the financial records, the property deed, and a flash drive containing every archived message. She reviewed everything over 2 meetings and a pot of green tea and said, "This is the most organized evidence package I've seen from a client in 19 years of practice." "I document things for a living," I said. "Clearly." She paused. "Here's what we're going to do." The plan was surgical. Prentice filed the initial paperwork for a fault-based divorce in early July, citing adultery, with the evidence sealed pending a hearing. She also filed a motion to freeze Thatcher's access to joint accounts, citing documented financial dissipation, which is the legal term for spending marital assets on an affair. The freeze would take effect the moment he was served. I also went to the condo on Ustic Road one more time. Not inside. I didn't need to. I sat in the Subaru across the street with my Nikon and a 70 to 200 millimeter lens and documented Thatcher arriving at 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday, kissing Waverly at the door, and entering the apartment with a bottle of wine and a bag from a lingerie store called Bow and Arrow. Timestamps embedded in the metadata. Admissible. Then I waited. The serving happened on July 22nd, 2019, a Monday. I chose that date because it was the 5-year anniversary of our wedding, and because I have a poetic streak that I'm not ashamed of. Thatcher came home from work at 5:40 p.m. I was in the kitchen making chirashi, scattered sushi over rice, one of my grandmother's recipes. The house smelled like vinegar and sesame. He walked in, tossed his keys on the counter, and said, "Something smells good. What's the occasion?" "Our anniversary," I said. He blinked. He'd forgotten. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. How to recover? What excuse to fabricate? Whether he'd already made plans with Waverly. "Right," he said. "Of course, 5 years. I was going to surprise you." "Were you?" "Yeah. I made reservations at Chandler's for Saturday." Chandler's. The restaurant where I'd seen him with Waverly, feeding her Sancerre and touching my grandmother's ring on her finger. He wanted to take me to the same restaurant. The audacity was almost artistic, like a painter signing someone else's canvas. "That sounds lovely," I said. "But actually you should check the mail first. There's something from the county." He frowned, walked to the front hall, picked up the envelope from the console table where I'd placed it. Blue-backed legal paper visible through the window. He opened it standing in the hallway, under the light fixture we'd picked out together at Lowe's 3 years ago, and I watched his face in the reflection of the hallway mirror. 3 years. The color went first, drained from his cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Then his jaw tightened. Then his hands, both of them, started a fine, almost imperceptible tremor. "What is this?" he said. Not loud, quiet, controlled, the way he sounded when he was scared. "It's a petition for divorce," I said, "on grounds of adultery. Your accounts are frozen as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, and the house is in my name, so you'll need to make arrangements." "This is insane. You're being crazy, Elle. You don't have— This is who told you—" "Nobody told me anything, Thatcher. I have photographs. I have messages. I have 6 months of credit card statements documenting $34,720 in spending on Waverly Ashcroft, including the lease you co-signed at the Ustic Road condo, where you've been keeping my grandmother's ring." He made a sound. Not a word. A sound. Like air leaving a tire. "I've also documented the financial dissipation in a format that meets evidentiary standards for Ada County Family Court. My attorney, Prentice Ogawa, will be in contact with yours." He looked at me, and for the first time in maybe 2 years, He actually saw me. Not Elle, the boring wife. Not the woman who took pictures of dead people's stuff. Me, Ellery Tanaka Voss, who had been watching and documenting and building a case with the same methodical patience she brought to every crime scene and every insurance investigation she'd ever worked. "You planned this," he whispered. I turned back to the chirashi, placed a slice of salmon on the rice. "Dinner's almost ready. You're welcome to eat before you go." He didn't eat. He left at 6:15 p.m. with a duffel bag, 2 suits, and no argument, because there was nothing to argue. The evidence wasn't an accusation. It was a record, and records don't negotiate. What happened next unfolded with the kind of cascading inevitability that I'd seen 100 times in insurance cases. One structural failure triggering the next, then the next, until the whole thing is just rubble and paperwork. Within 2 weeks, Thatcher hired a divorce attorney named Drake Fessenden, a loud man with a reputation for aggressive tactics. Drake filed a counter motion arguing that the frozen accounts constituted financial abuse. Prentice responded with the full evidence package: 247 photographs, 6 months of messages, the lease agreement, the credit card analysis, and a detailed accounting of the $34,720 in dissipated marital assets. Drake withdrew the motion the next day. Apparently, he called Thatcher and said, "You didn't tell me she had all this." Thatcher reportedly answered, "I didn't know she had all this." That detail came from Prentice, who heard it from a mutual colleague. The legal community in Boise is small, and information travels like water. Within a month, Waverly Ashcroft had left, not gradually, abruptly. She moved back to Salt Lake City in August after learning that the divorce proceedings would name her as the co-respondent in a fault-based adultery case. Her employer, Astellas, reassigned her territory. Whether that was related to the divorce or just convenient timing, I'll leave to your imagination. But she was gone. Thatcher tried calling her. She blocked his number. The woman he'd spent $34,720 on. The woman he'd given my grandmother's ring to. The woman he'd called everything Elle is not. She disappeared the moment the situation became inconvenient. There's a lesson there, but I'll let you draw it yourself. Within 2 months, Deirdre Caldwell, the Chanel-scented matriarch who'd mocked my career at Barbacoa, discovered that her son's legal bills were being paid with her American Express card, which Thatcher had apparently been using without her knowledge. She cut him off, which publicly, at a family gathering in Scottsdale, according to his cousin Brennick, who texted me an apology and the full account. She called him a disappointment in front of 18 people, Brennick wrote. Then she asked for her card back. Gage Pellerin, the coworker whose barbecue had been the scene of my humiliation, distanced himself after Climate Pro's HR department began asking questions about Thatcher's use of company resources for personal travel. The Portland business trip that was actually a McCall cabin weekend, Thatcher had submitted it as a client visit. That's expense fraud. Climate Pro didn't fire him immediately, but they put him on a performance improvement plan that everyone in the office understood was a slow-motion exit. The house. My house. I kept it because it was mine. The judge reviewed the deed, confirmed the title, and that was that. Thatcher's attorney tried to argue that he'd contributed to mortgage payments and was therefore entitled to equity. Prentice produced records showing that my freelance income, funneled through the separate credit union account my mother had insisted on, had covered 73% of the mortgage over 5 years. The judge was unimpressed with Drake's argument. The word she used was meritless. As for the $34,720, the court ordered Thatcher to reimburse half of the dissipated marital assets from his share of the remaining joint accounts. After legal fees, he walked away from a 5-year marriage with approximately $11,400 and a black F-150 with 87,000 miles on it. In September, he texted me. One message. "Can we talk? I think I made the biggest mistake of my life." I waited 3 days to respond. Not out of cruelty. I genuinely needed to think about what I wanted to say. In the end, I kept it simple. The paperwork speaks for itself, Thatcher. I hope you find what you're looking for. He didn't reply. I didn't expect him to. There's one more thing. The ring. My grandmother's ring. After Waverly left Boise, the condo on Ustic Road was vacated, and the property manager did a move-out inspection. I called him, the same manager who'd handed me the lease agreement months ago, and asked if anything had been left behind. He mailed me a small velvet box. Inside was the emerald ring, YT 1965, chipped prong and all. I took it to a jeweler on 8th Street, not the one where Thatcher bought Waverly's necklace, a different one, and had the prong repaired for $85. Then I drove to my mother's house in Meridian on a Sunday morning. She was in the kitchen making tamagoyaki, the rolled omelet she'd made me every Sunday since I was a child. The whole house smelled like dashi and soy sauce. I put the ring box on the counter next to the stove. She opened it, looked at the ring, looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady when she said, "Oba-chan would be proud of you." I sat down at the table where Ji-chan had once served me miso soup and told me that the patient eye makes the permanent record, and I ate tamagoyaki with my mother. And the October light came through the kitchen window in long amber bars, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was sitting in a room where every single thing was exactly where it was supposed to be. That winter, I applied for a grant to pursue a project I'd been dreaming about since my mid-20s, a photo documentary series on Japanese-American farming families in the Treasure Valley. Their stories, their tools, their land. I'd shelved it when I got married because Thatcher said it wasn't commercially viable, and who was going to pay for it? The Idaho Commission on the Arts funded it in January 2020 for $18,000. My first exhibition opened at the Boise Art Museum 16 months later. The photographs are still hanging. My grandmother's ring is on my right hand. And every image in the series is time-stamped, GPS tagged, and backed up in 3 locations. Old habits.